Bryce Bear, the City of Newport News. Yesterday we had a very serious and violent event occurred in the city. And I just am here to, first of all, thank the police department for the bravery of the young men and women who have taken care of this situation, and also to thank the community for their input in solving this crime so quickly. What I want to also is assure people that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that this community and all communities in Newport is safe. I think the police chief will share with you some of the activities that we have planned. I also want to make sure that people understand that the only way we're going to continue to get rid of this type of situation, these type of senseless crimes, is for the community to participate in solving these crimes. So I want to thank those of you who, again, every day put your life at risk for making sure that our community is safe. Chief?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to members of the council that are here. It's a rare thing to work in a community where you feel the kind of support from your elected officials to carry out the difficult and challenging mission that our officers have to do each and every day. And I think this is a tremendous show of support for our personnel. Before I go into details about yesterday's double homicide, I would like to touch on the overall issue of violence in the city. 1 year ago, in January of 2015, we experienced 6 homicides in 1 month. It's a pretty big number for a city this size, and we were all deeply concerned that by the end of the year, we were going to shatter all records. But we ended up the year with the exact same number as the year before, 2014. I only use this example to point out that those who engage in a numbers game are doing a disservice to the victims of homicide. Every life matters. 1 homicide is 1 too many. However, easily over half the homicides for several years running that we've seen have been the result of people making choices to engage in higher risk behaviors that put themselves at risk of being a victim. Now, I want to use this analogy. Right now in Newport News, we're seeing a bit of a spike in stolen vehicles, and we're working it hard. But the majority of the vehicles being stolen in Newport News today have the keys inside the car, and often the car is left running to warm up during cold weather. That's like wearing a sign that says, "Make me a victim." Likewise, we process several thefts from vehicles throughout the year. And again, in the majority of times, not always, but the majority of times, the vehicle owner left the vehicle unlocked. Now, such folks don't deserve to have their iPads or their cell phone or anything else stolen out of their car. But they made a bad choice that put them at a higher risk to be a victim. And making a better choice will do far more to limit victimization than anything the police can do. And so it is with homicides in our community. Now, we try very much to avoid demonizing victims, dragging out past transgressions or criminal records. First of all, it's very insensitive to the surviving families, and it may or may not have anything to do with their tragic death. But many of our victims in the last few years have, in fact, been engaged in risky behaviors that contributed to their exposure to violence. One of our earliest homicides in 2015 was a popular young man killed after he grabbed a bag of dope out of a drug dealer's car and ran away. We can all agree this young man didn't deserve to die, but indeed he made a fatal choice. My point in all of this is to say, I reject the growing sentiment that Newport News is inherently a dangerous place. We do sometimes have innocent victims who are not making bad choices fall to violence, just like every city does. One of our earlier homicides already this year was a victim who was killed while sleeping in her bed, her children asleep nearby, obviously not engaged in high-risk behaviors at that time. Domestic violence leading up to murder is a plague on every city in America. But here's the context. In 2015, 2 of the 26 homicides were attributable to domestic violence. 1 of our homicides was the result of robbery, and 1 was the result of retaliation of a prior crime. Those numbers, as much as I don't like playing the numbers game on homicides, those are small numbers in contrast with 7 homicides surrounding drug and gang activity and 3 from fights and arguments. It's my contention that if you are a law-abiding person not making choices to put yourself at great risk, you're as safe in Newport News as you are in almost every other city in the U.S. It's regrettable that the high publicity that accompanies a murder works on the community psyche like it does, but that's very understandable. Starting with Christmas week up until today, Newport News police have responded to 6 homicides. Some of those are solved. Some are very much under investigation. There is one particular aspect that's troubling, however. In more than one incident, witnesses have refused to cooperate or provided very little useful information that can help us bring offenders to justice. Why is that? I've heard one reason is trust. Police can't be trusted. For the past 2 years, the men and women of the Newport News Police have worked very hard to increase the level of trust with citizens. Is it better to trust a violent gang member than the police? Is it preferred to trust a local drug dealer or a robber who constantly shoots off their gun in your neighborhood? Nevertheless, if someone with information doesn't trust contacting the police, they have options. We have an anonymous crime tip line throughout the Hampton Roads. It's very effective, and we welcome its use. We have an ongoing and active relationship with many pastors in our community. In fact, in about 2 hours, I'll be doing a briefing with a group of them about yesterday's double homicide. If someone doesn't trust their police, seek out someone they do trust, like their pastor, so that we can get the information. Second, I know there is fear. FDR once said, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." And I think that's our current state. If we allow the fear of what might happen by providing information to get dangerous people off the street, to overcome the fear about those dangerous people themselves, I would say there's probably little the police can do. Before I provide the details about yesterday's double homicide, I would be remiss if I didn't express how immensely proud I am of the work of the men and women of the Newport News Police. Yesterday alone, we responded to a double homicide. Within minutes, had engaged a dangerous and ruthless suspect and captured him, took another dangerous and ruthless killer off the streets without any injuries, and finally initiated a long, detailed investigation on yet another suspicious death. Days like yesterday tax any organization, but you didn't hear one complaint or hesitation by our folks to dive in and do what needed to be done. I commend our patrol officers, our detectives, our crime scene technicians, support staff, dispatchers, and many other behind-the-scene folks for a very professional and competent job. Finally, I will advise that City Manager Borey has authorized a significant use of overtime for us to provide some high visibility, concentrated patrols in areas throughout the city, and we will initiate that as early as this evening. But I get back to this point. In those communities across the country that have significantly reduced homicides, it isn't because they put a cop on every corner. It's because the community worked in partnership with the police, providing information about who's carrying the guns, who's shooting them off in the neighborhood, who's selling drugs, who's running with the dangerous gangs that are intimidating and engaging in criminal conduct throughout the community. So we're going to put more police out there, and we're going to uphold our side of the bargain. We would plead with the community, help us, meet us, and let's partner in doing this. As I segue into what happened yesterday, it's a great example of what can happen when the community gets involved and engaged and provides us information. Listen to this time sequence. At 11:05, we received an initial call of a car crash in the area of 14th and Wickham. Within a short amount of time, the caller reported that now there were men with guns present, and shortly thereafter that there had been a shooting. At 11:07, first officers arrived on the scene and found two deceased males inside a van that had crashed into a parked vehicle. With citizen and eyewitness accounts, they were able to immediately radio out the description, detailed description and direction of travel of the fleeing suspects. At 11:09, a police sergeant from the South Precinct initially reported contact with an armed suspect who he found heading in the direction that was reported by the witnesses. At 11:09, the sergeant observed the two suspects in the 1300 block of Roanoke Avenue. The sergeant exited his patrol vehicle and confronted a suspect brandishing a handgun. The sergeant gave commands to the suspect, who did not comply, and the sergeant discharged his department-issued handgun. The suspect fled additionally on foot to the rear of a location in the 1300 block of Roanoke Avenue, where he discharged his weapon in an unknown direction. A second police officer, also a patrol officer from South Precinct, arrived on the scene and exited her patrol vehicle. The officer gave commands to the suspect, who was still armed with a handgun, on the rear porch of this residence, to surrender and drop his weapon. While giving commands, the suspect did not comply and the officer fired her department-issued handgun. And at that time, the suspect went down, and the officer and the sergeant took the suspect into custody. 2 handguns were located next to the suspect. The sergeant is a male with over 16 years service with the police department assigned to South Precinct. The officer is a female with over 19 years of service assigned to the South Precinct. We have not had a definitive next of kin and or identification of our 2 victims. So we're unable to release information about them other than the following. One victim is a 38-year-old male with the last known address in Norfolk, and the other victim is a 30-year-old male with a last known address in Norfolk. The suspect that was apprehended yesterday is a 33-year-old male. He remains in custody at a local hospital. We anticipate his release from the hospital in the next few days, at which time he will be taken to court on the warrants that we have obtained for the following charges: 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of use of a firearm in the commission of a felony, 3 counts of attempted robbery, and 1 count of possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Clearly, you can tell from the description of the charges, we have criminal history on our suspect. It's extensive, and I think we celebrate that we got a dangerous person off the street. There is a second suspect that we are looking for, and we have a detailed description and are actively looking for him. He is described as an African-American male wearing a dark cap, a white long-sleeve shirt, a black vest, and blue jeans, approximately 5'8" to 5'9" in height. Now, we're asking that anyone who has information about what happened, someone else who may have witnessed or had information about the activities of our victims leading up to the crime, please reach out and contact us. You can use the crime line. We have school resource officers in every school. If someone related with the school community wants to contact them, contact clergy throughout the community, we have a wide variety of sources. We have several of our precinct personnel and school resource officers. Increasingly, we're relying on social media to get information. We can take contact directly through our Twitter accounts or Facebook pages, any way that people feel comfortable sharing information. At this point, I would welcome, my caution to the media is this is a very dynamic and active investigation. Obviously, there's a lot more that we do know that we're not releasing at this time, because we don't in any way want to jeopardize the ability of our detectives to secure useful information that can help in the prosecution of those who carried out this egregious crime. So with that, I would open it up to questions that you might have.
I was wondering, in terms of the 2 victims, did the gunshots come from inside the van or was from outside the van? What can you say about that?
I know the answer to that question. Unfortunately, I'm not prepared to respond to that at this time.
Where were they shot? How many times? Can you tell us?
I don't have that information, I'm sorry. Typically, we wait and rely on the results of the autopsies rather than speculate. As you can imagine, at crime scenes particularly, if there are multiple wounds, it can be very difficult to ascertain that. So we'll wait for the autopsy results.
Are you able to confirm that either of these two victims, if not both, had multiple gunshot wounds?
I honestly don't have that information this morning, I'm sorry.
Do you know the relationship between the three and the two that were shot dead in the car and the third suspect?
The best that we know as of right now, it's a friendship relationship, but we really know very little about that at this time.
Between all four people?
Well, I understood the question to be the three who were in the van, who were the victims, two of which are deceased.
You may have said this already, but did the suspect that was shot ever like point his gun at officers, or did he just refuse to surrender? And were those two guns that they found on him, or when he went down, did they fall off of him? I know you said one was visible the entire time, so.
I'm not sure if he was carrying one or both in his hands at the time. I can tell you that both guns were recovered right in the immediate vicinity of where he fell after being engaged with gunfire with the officers. And I do know that he moved the gun around and fired it at least once.
At officers?
I don't have that information. It's an unknown direction. We're still investigating that.
So he fired it while they were trying to while they were trying to tell him to surrender. You're just not sure which direction?
Correct.
Okay. And so one of the guns was visible that police could see?
At least one of the guns was visible, yes.
I think it was probably around July 4th last year, we were talking about the first precinct, I think, getting body cameras. Were there body cameras on the officers, and is there video that you will be releasing from that?
Both of the officers involved in the shooting were wearing body cameras. Also, almost all the officers in patrol who responded to both scenes were wearing body cameras. There's literally dozens of hours of video that will need to be analyzed and reviewed. And at the strong urging of the Commonwealth Attorney, we are not going to be releasing that video at this time. It's evidence, and it's important that the evidence be gathered and analyzed to review statements that were made after the shooting, and even witness accounts speaking to officers in the immediate aftermath. All of that is evidence that has to be carefully analyzed.
And just kind of how you were prefacing at the beginning of the press conference, talking about the drug-related homicides, is there anything you can say about whether or not you believe this is a drug-related homicide?
It's way too early in this investigation to have any sense of, why. We know what happened, we don't know why at this point.
And you said the city manager approved significant overtime, that you're going to initiate this evening. How much overtime? And
We didn't talk about a upper limit on the number. I think there's a practicality of how much work can you squeeze out of your workforce, and so we're going to approach it from a balanced perspective. Also, it doesn't make sense to just throw manpower out willy-nilly without some strategy behind it. So our patrol bureau chief and the 3 precinct captains have been carefully identifying strategies to identify what hours of the day, what locations. Are we talking mobile patrol, foot patrol, bike patrol? Of course, the weather, it has an impact on how you deploy. We'll rely heavily on our crime analysts. We get frequently crime mapping of where our hot spots are and so on. So all of those things will go into the consideration of how we deploy.
Was there a question?
Yeah, thanks, Chief Miners. Going back to the tip the officers got from the witness, how did they know that information was reliable? And can you talk a little bit about that process, if that was the right person?
Yeah, I'm not prepared to go into the detail on the depth of evidence that we have, but we have an extraordinarily high certainty based on the evidence that we were able to gather quickly and effectively yesterday, coupled with the fact that the significant police response literally within minutes of the incident occurring contributed to that very high confidence level. Nature of that evidence and why it is so convincing.
I'm very confident. Are you at 100% yet or close?
We, again, don't like playing a numbers game.
And going back to the body camera situation, are you going to be releasing the footage not until after the investigation is over? Is that even or?
It's pretty early. I mean, we've had some preliminary conversations, but I would say at this point, you know, we really haven't given thought as to timing of the release of video. At some point, if it is appropriate, we might be able to, down the road, allow for some limited viewing of the video, but that may fall short of releasing it. But at this point, I just don't have a timeline for that.
Might there be some parts of the footage, I know there's a lot of footage, but might there be some areas that don't compromise the investigation and you can use face blurring technology?
That's potentially true, but the problem when you have hours and hours is until you vet through all of that, you can't really answer that question. So it's still going to take us some time. Right now, our priorities are identifying our second suspect and taking him into custody and finding out what level of involvement he has with the incident. Attending to identifying the victims, working with any families or survivors of the victims and their needs, and you know, proceeding on working with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office to identify what we need to do to successfully prosecute our suspects.
And just to be clear, did the sergeant, did he see both of the suspects? I was kind of fuzzy on that.
I believe initially he saw both suspects. He was only able to engage one of the two.
Any reason to believe that that second suspect that you guys are looking for is a danger? Like, is he armed?
Well, I think at this point, it's always appropriate when you have someone who was in proximity to and involved at some level with a homicide, they should be considered a dangerous person. That's why it's imperative if the community has any knowledge or insight, they help us get that person off the street. Okay, we will commit to putting out additional details as we can, most likely through our PIO office. If you have requests for additional information, please follow the normal protocol through the PIO office. As we get details, for example, down the road when we get autopsy results or other types of information, we will pass that on. Okay? Thank you.